And welcome to Night Callers Bigfoot Radio. You're here with your hostess, Lauren Smith, and I'm happy to have you all here tonight. Tonight we have Dennis Stone on. He is the president of America Stonehenge, which I'm very excited to learn a lot about tonight. But before we get into that, I thought that I would ask you to please show some love for the hardworking Night Callers team and hit that thumbs up on whatever platform you're using to listen to the show. And also, don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell for updates on new shows and content. You can also go to www.nightcallersproductions.com. I am working on new stuff all the time. I put out new content every single week for you guys. And I have a lot of great things coming that I don't want y'all to miss. So go to nightcallersproductions.com, check it out. I have extra content for my members. And so my members are through buymeacoffee.com/nightcallers. And through there, you can become a member and get access to extra night terrors, extra interviews that you can't see on the normal feed. So basically with that membership, you get an interview every week rather than every other week, plus an extra night terrors and lots of other exclusive information and content and a free sticker because, you can't beat that. So I wanted to shout out real quick. This weekend is the Fouke Monster Camp Out 2021. And we will be in Fouke, Arkansas at Smith Park. We're going to be having a great time. So if you're nearby, come on out, check it out. I have my Fouke shirt on today for the show. It's awesome. Jonathan Dodd, shout out to him. He did a great job. So you can buy this shirt on my Teespring account, or you can get the poster of this as well. And if you're coming to the camp out, Keith Crabtree is going to be signing them for you. So just, come on out, have a great time. And we have this annually, also one on Halloween. So if you can't make this one, there's always next time. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring on Mr. Dennis Stone, the president of America Stonehenge. All right. How are you doing tonight, Dennis?
Oh, good. Thank you, Lauren, for having me on.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm honored to have you here. I read your bio, and I know you've been on a few other very prominent shows, America's Unearthed and stuff like that. So, I really am honored to have you here.
Well, it's a pleasure to be on with you tonight. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Okay. So you're the president of America Stonehenge. What is that exactly?
Well, America Stonehenge is a little bit hard to describe, but it's about a 110-acre hill with all these stone ruins on top. Mm-hmm. And these stone ruins have been there, we believe, for about 4,000 years. We think it's a complex of stones that align with the sun, moon, and stars, so it's an astronomical site. It has stone structures that might have been used for different purposes, including burial, perhaps. So I don't think it's a living site like the Fred Flintstone, it looks like that, actually. If you look at some of the structures, they're sort of reminiscent of that. Mm-hmm. But we don't think it's a place of living. We think it's a place of worship, a place of observation, perhaps burial and ceremonial. But it's one of about 800 sites in the Northeast, including all of New England, New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware. It actually, now we're finding out some of these same type of stone features go right across the nation. So really? My dad got involved with this back in 1955. They knew of about 15 different sites across the Northeast. And again, since that time, we found hundreds of these sites. So it's not totally unique, but we don't believe it's colonial or post-colonial. We think it was built, again, around 4,000 years ago, plus or minus, and it might have been a layering of cultures. But the stone structures, you can walk inside of them. They have big stone roofs, big, gigantic slabs of stone that were used for the construction of these structures. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple of really unique features on our particular site. And we can get into that in a few minutes. But it's a state of New Hampshire historical site, was made that in 1970. So it did get some recognition from the state of New Hampshire back 50 years ago. And my family involvement started on a radio show back in 1955. There's a Lodge station out of Boston. It's one of the biggest New England stations, and it's still going. I think it's 85 years it's been going. But back in 1955, my dad was an AT&T Bell Laboratories engineer. And he had been there for about 2 years at AT&T, and before that he had spent time up in Labrador for the Coast Guard. right, not too far from where the Vikings landed. So he was always interested in the past. And unfortunately, he was there back in the early 50s before they found Monzo Meadow back in 1960. But he would have definitely taken a trip over there if he had been there at the time.
Yeah.
So on this radio show, they were talking about these strange stone ruins in North Salem, New Hampshire, about 40 miles north of Boston, about 20 miles from the seacoast. And he had never heard of these, and yet he only lived 8 miles away. And so it was a total surprise that this big Boston station had a whole topic about this for the evening, about these ruins. After that show, a couple days later, he's having his hair done. And the town we lived in was Derry, New Hampshire, where Alan Shepard, the first astronaut, came from, and Robert Frost lived there. So, there's a few things that were kind of stand out about Derry, but we lived there most of our lives. And so he's at a barber shop, and he's having his hair done. And as he was waiting, he picked up a magazine. And he's looking at the magazine, and the main feature of the magazine were these same stone ruins, which was kind of a surprise to him.
Yeah.
So he's looking at it, reading it, and there's photographs, and there's quite a bit written about it. And he asked the barber if he could keep the magazine, and the barber goes, "Well, how old is that?" He goes, "Well, it's 1952. It's been sitting here for 3 years." So just one of those coincidences. Thank God nobody threw it away.
Right.
Otherwise, my dad may have forgotten about the show, possibly. But that second thing really whet his interest. And that weekend, they were at my aunt and uncle's house in that same town of Derry. And about 10 people playing cards, they're around a table, probably drinking beer and having smoking, probably. This is 1955. I was a baby at the time. And my dad had the magazine with him, and he passed it around. Nobody really knew what it was. They looked at it. Nobody recognized what this thing was until my aunt and uncle looked at it and said, "Oh, wow. I think that's the place we used to go back in the 1930s on their bicycles. Used to bicycle down there when they were dating." So the next question out of my dad was, "Can you find the place?" And they said, "Well, we don't know. We haven't been there in over 20 years. Mm-hmm. So that Sunday, they all got in a car, and they drove around North Salem, New Hampshire. And they finally found a road that looked sort of familiar to them. And they parked the car next to the road. The four of them went up and through about a half a mile through woods, just dense forest and everything. And they found the site. And my dad climbed under this chain link fence. So they were trespassing at the time, of course. And he spent quite a bit of time looking at the ruins. The rest of them stayed outside this chain link fence. It covered about an acre of the main, what we call the main site. When he came out, everybody's like, "Well, what do you think?" And my dad was just totally blown away by this place, and mentioned something about maybe possibly getting involved with research study, maybe owning it, possibly opening it up to the public as a museum. Because my mom's response was something about, "You have rocks in your head," something like that, which he really did. So eventually my dad, he met the owner of the property. And in 1958, he opened it up to the public as Mystery Hill Caves as an attraction. And at the same time, he was working at AT&T, and he had a new family. My sister was just born just around that time. She was a couple of years younger than I was. And so he was quite busy with, they actually literally built our house too. So that was a lot of work. So my dad and my mom basically worked on this place, opening it to the public. They had a visitor center they built. And we've been going for, this will be our, I guess, a 63rd year we've been in business.
Oh my gosh.
So 1958, and this is 2021. So 63 years. Well, I got to do the math, But yeah, 63 years we've been open, but about 66 years that we've been involved with this site. So it's generational, like you were mentioning your show is kind of, part of your family. And the same thing here with ours too. And my son is an engineer like my dad, and my father-in-law were engineers. And I think before the show, I mentioned we had a granddaughter born on 9/11 of this year, and she'll be like the fourth generation. And I don't know if she's going to. I was a pilot for 35 years with the airlines. I don't know if she'll be a pilot or engineer or what she's going to do, but hopefully
something impressive, I'm sure.
Yeah. And I just hope she's interested in the site too. I just hope it continues on. In the family, hopefully.
Absolutely. So it is a family legacy. And how did you get to become the president of America Stonehenge? Or have you made any changes to it that you've implemented?
Well, my dad passed away in 2009. And then, of course, it went to me. My sister, she was kind of involved with it when she was younger, but she was a nurse and she went her own way kind of. She still had an interest in it, but she wasn't directly involved with it. Unfortunately, she passed away in 2012 from cancer, pretty quickly on us. So it was only myself and my sister, nobody else. And my mom and my dad had, because of the stresses of running the business and everything back in 1975, and I'm sure there are other issues, but they divorced at that time. Before that, my mom had been involved with the business too quite a bit. And I think she always kind of loved the place anyway. But
Mhm.
after the divorce, my mom, she went and did her own job. You know, she had her own work and everything, and I kept her up to date on what was going on there. But I took over, and my wife's been highly involved with it since 1993. She was in the corporate world with Chrysler Financial, Waddell and Reed, and she was with another company too, another big company. I'm trying to think of the name of it. But she decided in 1993 just to run the business. And at that point, she decided to take the visitors, add on to it a whole new section of it, which our accountant said you'll never be able to do, and she did. You know, she got the financing, and then she was basically the general contractor, and we put up a new visitor center. It has a theater, bathrooms, everything up to date. So she's been in it for almost 30 years full time, and she was homeschooling my son there too. Upstairs, we set up a classroom for him, so it really worked out well. And then he went to college and engineer and everything. So and in 1970, it was made a State of New Hampshire historic site. So it's that too on top of that.
That's awesome. I mean, that's quite the legacy, and I love that you're still continuing that legacy, and your son is going to continue that legacy, and hopefully your granddaughter.
Yeah, they'd be on that, hopefully, yeah.
That's
Because it
amazing.
could be house lots. Southern New Hampshire really got built up in the 60s when the Route 93 out of Boston came into New Hampshire and became a bedroom state for all, you know, Boston and that whole surrounding area had a lot of high-tech jobs. So a lot of homes, they're still going in today. The road went in 1963, and all of a sudden real estate prices went up, homes went up, and a lot of towns became little cities. And so we got about 110 acres we're preserving today. It's a beautiful hill, and it's probably the reason too. And we 3-year project of forest management, basically a harvest of the forest and thinning. And now you can see all the surrounding hills, and it's so beautiful that you look at it and say, now I kind of get the idea why these people may have chose this hill to build this site on, because it is really beautiful. And there's a river to the west. There's a glacial cliff shelter on the west side. In that glacial cliff shelter, we found pottery back in 1958 that dates to about 2,500 years. They call it Middle Woodland period pottery. So Native Americans are living on the west part of the hill, probably seasonally. In our parking lot back in 1995, they were doing some shovel test pits. We have the president of the New Hampshire Archaeological Society working with us since 1989, and she was doing a shovel test pit study across 110 acres and found a wigwam. Actually, the wigwam was a big dome structure, and it was about 30 feet across. What they found was all the stains from the post that supported it, 2 fire pits, and I believe Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, did the carbon dating on that. And they dated to about 2,000 years old, one fire pit, and the other one was about 1,700 years old. And they actually found the grease from cooking from that time still in the dirt. It hadn't degraded. And that could be dated too, but I think they were kind of limited budget because each carbon dating is very expensive. So Native Americans were on that hilltop too. The oldest carbon dating we have is 7,400 years old from a possible fire pit. So people may have been on that hill, some human activity going back to the Middle Archaic time period, almost 7,500 years. So people go, who was there 4,000 years ago in New Hampshire? But there were Native Americans going back over 10,000 years in northern New Hampshire in the White Mountains. So there's no question people were here. It's just who were they? Why did they build this site? And who were the people that built the site? For what purpose? Is this site related to some of the other 800 sites across the Northeast? And what happened to the people that built this? Those are all questions we'll still try to answer today. The site really shouldn't be here. We've been told that the Northeast shouldn't have any ancient stone ruins at all. And yet these things do exist. Mm-hmm. If you go to the Hudson Valley, right above New York City, Westchester and Putnam County and Dutchess County, there's about 500 sites. And some of these have been on Ancient Aliens, although they didn't talk much about aliens, but they did show some of the sites on the TV show 1.5 years ago. And they're very impressive looking chambers. And they tend to align with the sun on like a solstice or equinox or a cross quarter day. Sometimes a constellation like the Pleiades, it will be, if you're standing inside the chamber looking out through the entrance, it may be a long entrance, you'll see maybe a summer solstice sunset, but you might also see a Pleiades alignment with a structure, for instance. So astronomically, these sites seem to be aligned with the heavens. So farmers setting up these structures has been one answer, but I don't think the farmers were necessarily interested in setting up alignments with the solstices, equinoxes, cross-quarter days. And the moon goes through an 18-and-a-half-year cycle too that most people aren't aware of. And the next one comes up in 2025, and we just had that forest management. And for the first time, those particular avenues have been open because we began clearing in 1965, and we never got to the lunar alignments, the lunar max we call them. So 56 years later, we're just opening up some of the clearings we wanted to open up back in the 60s. So the work is continuing today.
That's awesome. So I know that you had the carbon dating from way back when. Hold on. That's just, hold on. My stream is acting odd. Let me make sure that everything's okay. Okay, there we go.
It might be this place. We get all sorts of weird things up here on this hill.
No kidding.
Particularly battery flying all the time when they're up trying to film, or drones, or professional crews coming in, like last summer, the Travel Channel. It's just constantly like, we brought all these batteries, like 6 batteries, and they're all dead. One of those weird things. So, yeah.
Do you think that has to do with the stones? With the, like, is there any electromagnetic energy coming off of them or anything like that? I don't know much about stones.
That's what they talk. Yeah, I'm not that well versed in it, but there's quartz in our rock, a lot of quartz. And there's iron, and of course there's feldspar, mica, and we have an earthquake fault line. The whole hill is split right in half, east to west, And interesting thing about a fault line is there's about 700 stone circles in Wales, ancient megalithic circles, and they actually go over the border right into England. And I've been in that whole area up there. But they're built within either about a mile and a half to the structures being built right on the fault lines. And in Scotland, there's about 800 stone circles. I've been to Scotland too, and I don't know if they're associated with fault lines too. But a lot of people claim they are, and ours is, you can see the whole crack right through the entire hilltop. So yeah, I don't know, maybe some energy drain there, something like that going on, possibly, but it's all these different people over the years, and we always laugh about it. They go up there, they bring their cameras, their drones, and all this equipment, and then it's dead, and they got to go back and charge it in the building, come back up and do another take, And,
well, on the flip side, on the non-land side, we have that same thing happen with Bigfoot. I just want you to know.
Oh, really?
Yes, that is a thing. Wow. Our equipment never fails. Batteries will go dead. Stuff will stop working. Same thing.
Same thing. Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So we do have a question. We have lots of questions from that. You have quite a few fans in the chat. I want you to know that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, So, okay. Cryptidville wants to know, does America Stonehenge align geographically with the site in the UK or any other sites?
Well, that's a great question. Scott Walters did a show called America on Earth. It ran from 2012 to about 2015. And then that was owned by ABC Disney Corporation, A&E. And then Travel Channel Discovery Network actually bought it, I think 2 years ago. And they ran 10 new episodes. And we were on one of the earliest episodes. They filmed us in 2012. My son was in college at the time. And during one of the semesters, he actually was playing with Google Earth. And he was going out looking across the Northeast particularly, not really thinking he was going to look overseas, but he was looking with other sites that are aligned with our solstices, equinoxes, cross-border day alignments, lunar alignment, just for kicks, just, one of those things. Right. This has been talked about for so many years, but with Google Earth, it's so much easier than it was in the 1970s when I know a lot of guys were getting involved with that, going, gee, maybe this alignment's aligned with the next hill, and that might be a pile of rocks called a cairn, or a stone structure, you can walk into kind of structure, or a standing monolith. But now with Google Earth, it's so much easier to do. And he was going across Maine with the summer solstice sunrise alignment. And that alignment's pretty cool because the stone is actually asymmetrically shaped. Most of our astronomical alignments, but not all, look like a big arrowhead with a point in the middle, and kind of that shaped like an arrowhead or a big spear stood up. And the tallest ones are around 10 feet tall. And so the summer solstice is unusual because it has a asymmetrical top. The point is on the, let's see if I got it right in my head. I'm looking at it on the left side, I think. And the slant is on the right side of it. When we opened up that alignment around 1973, because it was just all dense winds up there, when we finally saw the horizon in around 1973, clearing out about 800 feet of trees, all of a sudden we saw what the horizon looked like. Two hills intersect into the same shape as the top of that rock. So we think they shaped or dressed that stone to fit the notch about 5 miles distance. And between that stone and the astronomical center, which used to have 2 piles of rocks up to 1937, and unfortunately, the first archaeologist got in there with his crew and they cleaned, they excavated, and when they got to the pile of rocks, these 2 cairns, they didn't know what their function was. They thought they were hollow chambers, like beehive-shaped chambers. And they thought they were connected to one of our large structures called the oracle chamber, but they were not. So they dismantled them and they used the rocks for restoring another structure called the ramp. And we have pictures of that when they were tearing it apart and everything, which is a shame because in 1973, when we began surveying the site using a professional survey team, we found the astronomical center was those 2 cairns, and they were destroyed, 40 years before 1973, or roughly that, about 35 years before that. But if you look across at that stone I mentioned that has a slant, there's a stone circle, and that's where you stood to watch the summer solstice sunrise over that stone through the notch on those 2 hills, 5 miles distance. In Europe, they call those horizon features, and those same kind of features are found at some of the 50,000 megalithic sites of Europe. And I've been to quite a few of these. If you follow that line, like my son did, he went across Maine, and Maine doesn't have a lot of these sites. Connecticut's loaded, New York is definitely loaded, and Massachusetts has a lot. Vermont has quite a few too. But Maine has a few structures, and it's a big state too in New England. But he went right across past Nova Scotia, past Newfoundland, and right across the ocean, and it came up in southern England. He had been to Stonehenge a few times. We took him over there. And he said, gee, this is close to Stonehenge, this particular line, And so he changed the scale, and as he kept changing it, he said, yeah, that's pretty close to Stonehenge. All of a sudden, he just blew it up, and there's Stonehenge sitting underneath the line, which is pretty cool.
That is interesting.
You can try it yourself, using Google Earth. And not only did it go through Stonehenge, but it went through one of the large trilithons. There's 5 of them, kind of in a U-shaped pattern at Stonehenge, and it goes right through the center of it, and it's amazing. And it's one of those things, could it be a coincidence or not? And that was on Scott Walter's show. After that, I decided to learn how to use Google Earth, and I started looking out elsewhere, like on our true south alignment. We have a true south alignment, and there's a true south wall. And just about 4 years ago, I found out that's one of our serpentine shaped walls. It's shaped like a snake. And it's also true south pointing right off those astronomical platforms. If you went from the 2 astronomical platforms are located north and south true of each other. It goes true south, you go through this serpent wall, which we didn't know in the 1970s. We just call it the south wall. If you continue, it goes through Machu Picchu in Peru, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Our winter solstice sunset goes southwest, and it goes into the moon pyramid at Teotihuacan, north of Mexico City. And I've been there with my dad back in the early 80s. That's an amazing site down there. Again, I believe that's another UNESCO World Heritage Site. The equinox sunset goes through Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, which we were at about 20 months ago, and through Pueblo Bonito. And it's a big D-shaped structure at Chaco Canyon. And that line goes right through the center of that. On the other side, the equinox sunrise, it goes through the Canary Islands. And Canary Islands, most people don't know, have some really cool truncated pyramids. And it goes right through the pyramids. So it could all be coincidental. I know the skeptics and the debunkers will think it's purely coincidental. They've also called their astronomical alignments coincidences, but there are 51 alignments for the sun, moon, and stars. I could see a couple being coincidental. I think most reasonable people would say, yeah, you could have a couple coincidences. But when you have 51 of them that align, I think that's a little more than coincidental. So when you hear anybody skeptical talk about the site, they usually don't discuss the astronomical alignments other than perhaps saying, oh, that's, what do they usually use a certain term, and they sometimes say coincidence, because I know archaeologists mainstream like the word coincidence,
Right.
I don't think that's coincidental at all, especially you have the stones that are shaped like arrowheads. They were part of the bedrock. They had to be separated from the bedrock. Then they were dressed using a technique called percussion flaking. It's the same technique ancient people used to use to make arrowheads, stone axes, stone knives, and if I mentioned arrowheads, but it's a technique of shaping the stone. And this was found by Dr. David Stewart Smith when he joined us in 1978. He passed away in 2016. Unfortunately, we're just starting to find serpentine walls. We have 14 of them, and we were finding some other features, but he got cancer that year, and he learned of a few of these. But he was the one that really was instrumental in finding that the stones that make up all these chambers, these are big slabs of stone. Some of them weigh close to 30,000 pounds, and because they're smaller ones, they make up the roof slabs, the wall slabs. These are big slabs stood on the end, like a big vertical stones. They're called orthostats. And also the astronomical alignments, the sacrificial table, and even the drains. There's a whole network of underground drains, and these consist of rocks, like parallel rows of rocks with capstones. Those capstones are flat, and they were once part of the bedrock. So somebody separated the bedrock. It is foliated. It comes up in layers. And then they would use hammerstones to shape it. And the first stone that was found like that, still in its quarry site, was 1982. Dave had instructed our staff, if you're out in the woods and you see a stone that looks like it might be lifted off the bedrock and maybe propped up with another stone, artificially perhaps, and the edge of it looks serrated, like dimpled, it might be a stone that's being quarried and shaped. And one of our staff members, her name was Mary, and she was out having a picnic lunch in 82 in the summer, sitting on this rock, and she kind of noticed, looking down, that the rock seemed to be propped up, as Dave had mentioned. She looked underneath it because there's a lot of debris that had built up in dirt. She saw a stone that seemed to be supporting it. And then she noticed the edge of it looked dimpled, like somebody might have been hammering on it to shape it. So in 1980, and Dave saw it, was thrilled by that. And he did an excavation in 1983. And when he dug down through several inches of soil on the bedrock, they found all the little flakes of stone laying there where they had been struck with a hammerstone. And a state archaeologist who's what we call mainstream, they're usually a little bit more skeptical about our site, let's say. Well, he came down, and I think he was impressed by Dave anyway, and Dave's credentials and Dave's sincerity and Dave's dedication and hard work. And Dave had just, before he joined us in 78, had been over in Europe working for the British government on medieval sites and megalithic sites doing restorations. So he had 6 years of experience over there too. Then he got a couple doctorate degrees and everything. So he listened to Dave, he came down, and he kind of oversaw that work. And he said, it's unmistakable that your big slabs here were actually shaped using Stone Age technology, not Metal Age technology. So getting back to that alignment, that stone has been shaped, it was stood up, and it does align with Stonehenge, which is pretty cool. And then we have the other ones I mentioned too.
Right. That is, it's just unbelievable how I've always told people, if I could have one superpower, it would be to be able to touch something and go back in time and, see what was going on, like what this stone has been through, art, stones, stuff like that. History is fascinating to me. And with what you're doing, you're preserving it, which is amazing. You're discovering it, which is amazing. But you're showing what was going on back then and how we've come to be where we are now. And that's just fantastic to me,
My dad always says you learn from history, and
Yes.
you don't learn from the future, you learn from history. But thank you so much for that. Yeah, it's one of the sites that is being protected. In the 1960s, a lot of highways, as I mentioned, went in, and there are some chambers. There's a couple outer belts around Boston, Route 128 and 495, which is part of 95 that goes from Maine all the way down to Florida, that Route 95 on the east. Anyway, 495 is an outer belt of Boston, and 128 is a little bit closer in. And we have photographs still in our records of stone structures that were back in the 1963, they were bulldozed, and they're no longer there because at the time, and even today, there's some doubt as to what these structures are, they're not important. People shouldn't be wasting their time looking at these old stone structures. They should put their time into legitimate archaeological sites. We've heard that, which is really a shame. But as David Stewart Smith said, he told me this before he passed away, it seems to be an ancient culture of stone builders, or what we call a lithic culture, across the Northeast. And what he didn't know is we're finding the same type of stone structures all the way out to California. There's a town called Weed, California, and there's stone walls that resemble ours, with serpentine walls, chevron-shaped walls that will go to a boulder, then it will change course, go to another boulder, change course again, going to another boulder. New England farmers, when they built walls, they built them for generally three purposes: to clean a field. You don't want the rocks in the field if you're going to plow, because you'll hit them. The other reason is to establish a boundary and perhaps a stock fence. And sometimes these walls served all three purposes. And in New England, there's about 240,000 miles of walls, enough to go from here to the moon and a little bit beyond that. But we think there's also these ancient walls that were not built by farmers. And they look different. They have a lot of big slabs of stone versus the rounded type field stones that farmers found left over by the glaciers, kind of rounded, These walls will have windows in them, beautiful linteled windows. I don't know if I sent you a picture of some of the linteled windows. They're absolutely beautiful. We have 14 of them at our site. There's also windows like that in the Berkshires in Massachusetts, and they're part of serpent walls, just like some of ours are part of the serpent walls. Serpent wall will be a wall that looks like a snake. There's a head, a body, and a tail. Connecticut has hundreds of them. And down there, they go from 30 feet in length up to about 300 feet. The average is about 100 feet. They can be linear or straight. They can be rectilinear with the head like 90 degrees off from the body, or the tail can be. And some of them are shaped like the letter S, just like you think a snake would look. And some of them actually looped. They'll actually come back around and they'll bite their tail, and that's called the Ouroboros. And there's actually ancient jewelry, and I think on pottery there's paintings, but it's part of the ancient mythology of Egyptians, Greeks, and other cultures. Even in the Americas, Ouroboros would represent eternity, or the circle of life. And one of our biggest serpent walls actually starts with the watch house. It's a chamber that's about 300 feet from the main site. It's a multifunctional chamber. There's a lot that's going on with it astronomically, but it looks like the head of a serpent, and in the back of it, it undulates. It goes around counterclockwise, 2,550 feet. Comes back in front of its mouth, and it looks like it's biting it. It does one more hump or undulation, and then it twists 90 degrees to a pointed tail. And we've always seen the hump. We always saw what we know as a tail today. But over, I'd say at least 6 decades, my family was there, because we didn't find this until about 4 years ago. We never recognized it as anything to do with serpent or anything. We just thought it was part of a wall. And you look at it now, and it's unmistakable. It does the undulations and everything. And the head of it looks like a big serpent. And it's very similar to the ones in Pennsylvania. And again, back in Connecticut, there's like hundreds of these things. The Hudson Valley has them too. Mm-hmm. And when you see these repeating patterns across the landscape, Alabama has them. They call them rattlesnake walls. They're in Indiana. And in eastern Colorado, they have the same thing. So when you see these things stretched across the country, you don't think this is just a big coincidence, or just a crazy farmer building a wall. It just happens to look like a serpent, you know?
Right. I actually, I saw recently, I was doing a little research for this show, and I actually saw the walls like that, but I read that they were made like that because it used less rocks or bricks than a regular wall. But
they're actually longer though. They're actually
really, yeah.
I mean, they take it. Yeah, I've heard somebody say, "Oh, maybe they put a wooden fence next to us." Like our big S-shaped one is 38 feet long from tip to tail. It's a big sweeping S with a triangular head, and it has a flat slab in it, which is stood up. We call spine stone. A lot of these serpent walls have these vertical slabs in like a repeating pattern again, and they call them a hermstone or a Manitou stone, the Manitou. But I don't think they're and these are sitting right on bedrock too, right on bedrock. So somebody might say, "Well, some farmer cleared the land to plow." We've run about almost 100 shovel test pits across the hill, almost one shovel test pit per acre. And we found one plow mark up near the summer solstice where the plow was set on the ground, but there's no cultivation marks across the rest of the landscape. It's just too thin. The soil's not arable. It's full of rocks. And so when you have a wall that looks like a serpent, and it undulates vertically or horizontally, and it doesn't serve a purpose for a farm. I lived on a farm for my first flying job up in Rutland, Vermont for an airline. I lived in the summer house, and I drove my 10-speed around. I used to do a lot of instruction up there in the plane too, flying low over these farms. But by bicycle, I'd look at these farms, and when I lived on, I said, this doesn't look anything like our site or the walls, The walls farmers built, they're usually pretty linear, with some exceptions. They're pretty straight. They go pretty straight, you might bend and that kind of thing. And we have really good photographs of farmers' walls. But when you have a wall that undulates up and down vertically, and then you have these windows in it, and then you have a boulder head and a boulder tail, and they just don't go anywhere. They're just sitting in the middle of the woods. Right. It's like, what's that? What is that? It looks like a serpent. I think the constellation Draco may have been inspirational for them. And there's about 94 serpent mounds, with the most famous is in Peebles, Ohio. It's 1,350 feet long. And its undulations are actually aligned with the solstices and equinoxes. It's on the side of a meteorite crater. And that was only discovered a few years ago, several years ago. They found that the ancient people built it on that. They are trying to get that on the United Nations World Heritage Site. World Heritage Site. They're trying to do that, but I think right now with COVID-19, everything's slowed down, and I don't think it made it last year. But it's a pretty amazing structure.
Mm-hmm.
But our stone wall that wraps around itself and bites its tail is about twice as long as that.
That's amazing. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence. I have to agree with you. It's a good friend of mine says she doesn't believe in coincidences, and after hearing that, it just doesn't make sense. All right, hold on. We had another question. Is there any evidence of Druidic activity at the site here in the U.S.?
Well, the site, if it's 4,000 years, it predates that time period of the Druids. And I know even Stonehenge has been linked to the Druids, but Stonehenge goes back almost 5,000 years, and it took about 1,500 years to build with what we know today. I mean, someday in the future, we may have different dates for you and on that. So the Druids are around, but at a later time period, and usually were enforced and everything. So I don't have any evidence that the Druids used our site at all or did not use our site.
Okay.
But our site does resemble the megalithic sites, and megalithic sites in Western Europe number about 50,000. If you go into Russia, the Ural Mountains have about 3,500 what look like Western European megalithic sites. They're in China. They have their own website, India, and there's just thousands of them. North Korea probably has them because South Korea had about 80,000 megalithic sites, and they really take care of them very well. And a megalithic site just means huge stones, huge stone structures. And they go from the Neolithic into the Bronze Age. And once you hit the Iron Age, the megalithic building stopped in the West, Western Europe. But recently we found out they're in Australia. And I did a radio show with a host from New Zealand live back about 3 or 4 years ago. And, we talked about our site just like we're doing now. He never mentioned it, but there are megalithic structures in New Zealand. And I only became aware of that in the last few months. So back 4 or 5 years ago, he may not have been aware of it either. But in Australia, the Aussie Stonehenge is an example. So they think people have been in Australia probably 50 to 60,000 years. And I was aware of paintings or petroglyphs, but not really stone structures, but there are. I have a number of people that have visited us in the last couple of years from Australia, and they weren't aware of it either. So it's not well known over there, but you can actually Google that, and you'll see that these structures exist, Mm-hmm. So they seem to be worldwide on every continent except the Antarctic. And if they weren't in North America, it would be a little unusual because they're in Ecuador and South America. There's the, what do they call it? The Brazil, I think it's called, Stonehenge, or the Amazon Stonehenge. It's actually, it borders Brazil and I think French, was it French Guiana, I think? I forget. It's one of the, just north of Brazil, there's another country, and it's right in that country on the border of Brazil. And it's actually megalithic. They look like megalithic ruins you see elsewhere, It seems to be almost like a worldwide phenomenon of building these huge, building these structures with huge stones in them,
That's amazing. And I'm guessing it's not just for shelter, which is what you would originally think.
Right. Yeah. These people think our site was a village because it kind of looks, again, like the Fred Flintstones, but the size, the shape, the orientation of the structures, the amount of space inside, a lot of stonework went into them, but they yield very little interior space. And when you look at the artifacts, we have hammerstones, rubbing stones, stone scrapers, arrowheads, and a lot of these are on display in our museum. You can come in and see them. Some people say, well, there's no Stone Age artifacts, like they're right in the display cases, And there's actually been, many of them that have been found on our site. But if it was a living site, you'd find their middens or the trash pits. And that's what you really want to find, The people in Western Europe, generally, they lived in hide, wood, or bark homes when they built places like Stonehenge. And those places are no longer there. Material is, it decomposes. You might find arrowheads and pottery and that kind of thing, but you don't find their structures because they've rotted away, basically. Right. And that made it very difficult for archaeologists over the years. When they look at these megalithic sites, they weren't places where people lived, as far as we know today, They were places of worship, observation of the heavens, that kind of thing, perhaps burial, because even Stonehenge has some of the ashes there. But they weren't villages per se, Okay. And now they're starting to find them using LiDAR, and they're using like WorldView 3 satellite imaging, they're using thermal imaging, and ground penetration radar, which we've used all of that at our site, except for the satellite imaging. And you can actually see things under the ground. And that's how they're finding some of their villages. And once they get into that and they can do some excavations, it starts to tell a story about the people, how long they were there, who the people were, what they ate, all sorts of information that these big stone ruins don't tell. They're massive, they're impressive, they last almost forever, but you can't tell a lot about the people that built them. It just was a big mystery. And that's all recent, because I've been over to Stonehenge in Europe quite a few times. I haven't been in since over 20 years, and a lot has been discovered since then. We got to get back over there, I guess. So.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Report back. No, that's I mean, very well stated about they're amazing, but they don't tell us much. However, to talk about new dating techniques, so I know that there are some new dating techniques out there that y'all have used. Lots of big names with acronyms. Like the surface luminescence dating, SLD, and optically stimulated luminescence, OSL. Yeah, so all of those, drone, thermal imaging, high definition photographs, LiDAR, like you said, WorldView 3 satellite, etc. So you guys, I mean, you really, I know that the world below will tell you more, but it looks like you guys are doing everything you can for these methods to tell you what you're looking at.
Yeah, we look above to the heavens, like the serpent walls might be inspired by the constellation Draco, for instance, that kind of thing. But we have been using LiDAR. A gentleman approached us just about a year ago. He's out of Connecticut, and he's mapped about 15 acres. And it took about 600 hours of processing. And the handheld LiDAR can 300,000 points per second. And each square meter is about 150,000 points. And airborne drone LiDAR is about I think he said 400 to 800 points per square meter, and airborne's only 4 to 8. So this is high resolution. It's 3D, and he actually has cameras on top of the handheld LiDAR, definition cameras. And the imaging is amazing, and you can strip out the trees and all vegetation, almost 110 acres. So he hasn't done all of it. He did 15 acres. And one of his friends brought in the ground penetration radar last year too, and she was mapping some of the site with that. And we have had ground penetration radar there in the 1990s. One of our neighbors, actually a company, GSSI, actually was a quarter of a mile from us, and they were selling their equipment worldwide. They moved downtown Salem about 8 miles away. Now they're in Nashville, New Hampshire, so we don't see them, but they used to bring their customers up and use the equipment with our archaeologists. And you can see up down to about 100 feet under ideal conditions. And in some cases, like a salty road, the woman that owns it, Doria, she says, yeah, you can see down to about 2.5 feet. It depends on the soil conditions and a lot of different factors, but up to 100 feet ideally. So what they're going to do with it, she mapped part of the site too, and what they're going to do is take her image and his images, and they're going to blend them together for 3D above and below ground on some of the site. It will be the first time that's done. And she just got a new computer with new software. And the gentleman, Tom, who owns the LiDAR, he just got a supercomputer too to handle all the processing. And it still took about 600 hours just to process the 15 acres. We have photogrammetry. You take thousands of pictures of like a structure, and then you come up with like a 3D image of it inside and out. And that's pretty cool. We've had that at our site too. It looks a little bit like LiDAR almost. And they've been doing that in Connecticut on some of the serpentine walls, and they look amazing. And we have thermal imaging camera, and a gentleman, he's been doing that for about 3 years, and he's going to come back again now that we have the forest management thing done. And his imaging can go down to maybe 15 inches under the soil. I'm not sure, but he can see mostly surface. And it has to be like a temperature differential for this thermal imaging camera to work. And he uses a drone, and he just bought a new camera. I guess it uses both high definition regular photography with thermal imaging, and it blends it together. And he's been, he's going to be using that. He actually came up last year and he tried it, but he's got to come back and use the new equipment. I think it was like a $12,000 camera, and like a $6,000 drone or something like that. And so we've had all of that. We haven't had the WorldView 3 satellite. Sarah Pockott from Birmingham, Alabama is the one she's called the space archaeologist. She's found perhaps the second Viking settlement up in Newfoundland, and more pyramids over in Egypt. And I think she's helped out in Guatemala, where they found 60,000 more Mayan temple sites using LiDAR, and I think her equipment too. And our gentleman, Tom, that owns the LiDAR, he has been in touch with her over the last 10 years. So I don't know, it'd be kind of cool if she could turn her satellite towards New England to see if there's some things that we haven't seen yet,
Right.
So we're interested in all that equipment right now. And the OSL, optically stimulated luminescence, we have had that at our site. It was done on 9/11, the day my granddaughter was born, which is kind of, it was a day, when the World Trade Center was hit. I work for American Airlines too, so it was very close to that. But anyway, that day they had 25 members up from Brookhaven National Laboratory, from the University of Washington. Dr. Feathers came up. 2 state archaeologists from Concord, New Hampshire were there. The New England Antiquities Research Association, the group my dad started in '64 there, a team came down. And we had the past president of New Hampshire Archaeological Society, all these people on staff, and they took 4 cores at our site. And it takes quite a while to get it processed, and it's over $1,000 per core. And what they can tell you is how old the dirt is or how old the rock is. So if you build a structure and then it's concealed under earth, you can actually go and you can date the dirt, how long it's been sitting there, and get an idea how old the wall is or the structure or whatever. And I found out today about 2 o'clock that we won't have to wait till next September. It's usually about a year wait. We were also aware that it might be a little bit sooner than that, but today we found out that Dr. Feathers is retiring from the University of Washington, I think, sometime this year. He wants to get this done. So we may get some results this week. It could be tomorrow. And they did 7 other places. So they did 2 more sites in New Hampshire, north of us. They did 1 in New York, north of New York City, at one of the sites down there. 2 in Connecticut and 1 in Rhode Island. So we're anxiously awaiting ours, excited too, ours plus those other 7. 1 in Pennsylvania that NERA had looked at, that group had studied in 2018. It was a separate project. And the results came back last year from that. It was actually terracing, man-made terracing of stone, a stone structure. Again, it should be colonial, post-colonial, according to mainstream. And the dates on it kind of range from about 3000 BC up to about, I'm going to say about 500 AD. But what they call the central date or the medium date or the weighted date, I guess, was 570 BC. So this structure was sitting there at least 500 years before Christ. So it wasn't colonial or post-colonial.
Right.
So, and they may want to do it again just to double check, doing it, but it's very, very expensive to do it. So our site had 4 cores. So you can imagine how much. Yeah. Somebody from there had passed away and left some money to help out on this project, which is really nice. And I hope they honor this particular person. They left quite a bit of money. And NERA has been really good about picking out projects to do dating and, survey work and this kind of stuff. So we're really excited about the OSL. We have had 12 carbon datings at our site starting in 1967. And then we had the astronomical survey that took place from 73 to 1977. We called that Part 1. We sent that data to the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And in 1978, we got the results back. And what they said, we have the name of the person that did the whole analysis with the data. So, well, if these alignments were used for that purpose with the sun, moon, or stars, they would work about 1800 BC, plus or minus a couple hundred years due to the Earth's tilt. You also have 24 star alignments. Of course, at that time, we only knew of 1 with Polaris, the pole star, the north alignment. We didn't know we had 23 other star alignments. So that today we have 51 alignments with the sun, moon, and stars. And that 1800 BC did agree with the earliest carbon dating on the main site in 1971. So 7 years before we got the results from Harvard, we got the carbon dating from Geochrome Laboratories, also in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and that was 1800 BC plus or minus 250 years. So carbon dating and astronomical data seem to agree. And then with David Stewart Smith and Dr. Derry Hume, the state archaeologist, the way the stones are shaped using percussion flaking, seem to agree with that, Didn't give you an exact date, but it kind of agrees with a prehistoric date. So that's the OSL's coming up. Yeah, it could be this week. We might be excited. I'm a little anxious to see.
I hope that y'all get the results this week. I really do.
I'll send you a message. Yeah.
Okay, please do. Please do.
Yeah.
So you also have a website. So that's www.stonehengeusa.com. Will you be posting the results on the website?
We will. Yeah, we'll put it on a website. We have Facebook. We have Instagram. My daughter-in-law really handles most of that. And then I'm sure we'll probably, it might make some news. I'll let all like yourself, I'll let you know about it. And sometime we can fit that into a program again, with some more evidence or something that might be interesting to your listeners.
Absolutely.
But the place has brought a lot of people to our site, like I mentioned, Ronnie LeBlanc with the Bigfoot, expedition, he's been there. And my dad's friend, Charles Hapgood from Keene State College, he wrote many different books and became kind of famous in the circles. And Albert Einstein actually signed one of his, and actually did the forward, one of the only forwards that Albert Einstein ever did. I think it's called Earth Shifting Crust, I believe it was. And he wrote several books, but he was over in Keene, New Hampshire, which is about 2 hours west of here. And he was really involved with our site too. He thought maybe ancient Phoenicians built our site, and that goes back to 1961. But he gave my dad a cast of Bigfoot back in 1982, just before he passed away. And he gave my dad some of his collection too. And I started at my dad's house probably 8 years later. He built a new house, not very close to the museum. And I saw it on the wall. I go, what the heck is that thing? He goes, well, that's Bigfoot. And Charles Hapgood gave it to me. I said, well, where the heck did he get that from? And he said, well, it came from Sir Edmund Hillary. And Sir Edmund Hillary, of course, the first guy to climb Mount Everest. I said, he did? He goes, yeah, he went over there. He thought it was in 1961 with Marlon Perkins from, it was called the, what the name of it was, it was an ABC show, the Wild Animal Kingdom, I think it was called. And Mutual of Omaha's Wild Animal Kingdom. It was a show that ran into the 70s. But Marlon Perkins was the original host. They supposedly went to the Himalayas to look for Bigfoot back in 61. So I did a little research last year trying to pin that down a little bit more. And what it looks like is Sir Edmund Hillary went over with Eric Shipton, the famous British mountaineer, in 1951. And they found some tracks. They took a whole bunch of pictures, and when they got back to London, they actually created the cast in the studio or back at the headquarters. It wasn't where they poured plaster into the track or anything like that. And so I think this cast goes back to 1951. And again, Eric Shipton, he's pretty famous, in the circles. And it wasn't the one 10 years later with Marlon Perkins. It was actually 2 years before Sir Edmund Hillary actually climbed Mount Everest. So that was kind of cool, and we still have that in our collection today. But our website is stonehengeusa.com. And if you go there, you can actually look at our 12-minute video because our theater is closed. Our building is open again, but the theater is closed because of COVID-19. You can download a free app, and you can do a complete virtual tour of our site. And it has audio, it has visual, and it has text about what the site is. So you can either take a complete virtual tour at home, but when you come to our place, you can use it as you're walking around. It's pretty cool, It's right. I think some of the national parks are starting to do that today too, And there's a phone number, there's an email. If you have questions, call us or email us, So, and we're open every day but Thanksgiving and Christmas. And we're open right now from 9 to 5. It takes about an hour and a half to take a tour of the site, basically.
That's amazing.
About an hour north of Boston.
Well, I've added that to my bucket list. I just want you to know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Soon as I can get up that way. But I am planning to get up that way. I'm going to have to take like a 2-week thing to do all the Bigfooting and Stonehenging and everything that I need to do.
That'd be cool. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So we have quite a few questions from the chat if you're up for it.
Oh, sure. Yeah, try.
Okay. All right. Jamie King wanted to know, what about ley lines within the Earth energy grids?
Yeah, there has been a study of that in the late 70s. There was actually a booklet written in England. Francis Hitching was in the book, Edward Krupp from the Griffith Observatory. And I have the booklet at the museum. I actually rediscovered it about 2 years ago. And I have a friend in England, Maria Wheatley. She's really big on this over in England. And in fact, about a year ago, she was with Patrick Stewart from Star Trek, the commander. She was at one of the megalithic sites, but she's big in dowsing. And her dad visited our site back over 40 years ago, and I didn't know it, And she was going to visit us last fall, and she's really big into ley lines, dowsing. And I've done some of it myself just for fun, just to try it out. I have a couple of friends that do it, and they gave me the rods, let me try it. And they said I was actually quite good at it. I don't know if I am or not. But the astronomical alignments, actually, that booklet shows a nice map of the walls and the astronomical alignments in 1978. And that alignment that goes to Stonehenge, as I mentioned, that's one of the prime ley lines, according to them in 78. That was like 43 years ago, they said that. What was his name? John Michel was in that book too. And he's from England. And Francis Hitchens from England. And Maria Wheatley, she has that booklet too, and she was familiar with it. But I wish I remember the name of the booklet. It was very good because it was a study of the ley lines at our site. They said the walls were on the water lines and the astronomical alignments were the ley lines. So when it goes to Stonehenge, it's claimed to be a ley line too. And I got a couple of friends that have been up there. One was in charge of the West Coast Dowsers convention out in Santa Cruz that went virtual last year. I was supposed to go out there and do PowerPoint presentations for them at the university, and that got canceled, so I didn't get out there. But she's really good at dowsing, and she was kind of like my mentor. And we'd walk along, I'd close my eyes, and the rods would go out when we crossed the ley lines because I didn't want to trip or anything like that. But we did it many, many times, and I tried to do it without looking, and all of a sudden the rods would go out, So I don't know, it seemed to work. My dad claimed he found the well at our museum so people could have drinking water back in 1958 using dowsing rod. Actually, it was a dowsing stick. He used that. So we do have people coming down. Stig Longren was the president of the American Society of Dowsers out of Vermont. He's in England now, and Maria knows him too. And he would bring his groups down in the 70s and 80s, and I think maybe in the 90s he relocated himself to England, and that's where he does a lot of his work today, Stig Longren. But he wrote books, I guess, and he was kind of famous. He's getting up there too, and age like all of us, but he's still over there in England doing that, looking at these ancient megalithic sites and the ley lines over there too. So we're familiar with it, definitely. And people can come in if they want, and they can do that. It doesn't disturb the site, It doesn't impact. It's not like they're digging holes up there. Metal detectors we frown on. We have our own because people want to go up there and dig. It's like, no, you can't dig. This is an archological site. You have to do it properly. But I had people show up one day with a couple of months ago. I'm like, oh, excuse me. But yeah, we want to go up there and with the metal detector and set. I'm like, no, you can't do that. But doing with the pendants with the rods, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
That's fascinating. I actually did not know. Woefully uneducated, apparently, but I didn't know that there were. I knew that people still dowsed. I just didn't realize, I guess, that there were groups and everything dedicated to it. That's fascinating.
If people are interested, they can Google just dowsing, and then they'll find the groups and stuff like that.
That's amazing.
I think there's supposed to be one this year at there's a dowsing group and I think the same lady, she's in Massachusetts. She did the one out of Santa Cruz, and she's doing the one in Flagstaff. I think it's in October or something like that. So there are groups, and they do meet in different parts of the country, and we welcome them as long as they don't dig at our place. Non-invasive kind of thing.
Yes. Okay. Let me ask. Are the stones indigenous to the area where they're constructed? And again, that's
a
Jamie King.
Really, really good question. The quarried slabs were quarried off the hilltop, and since that one in 1982 was discovered by Mary, we found, especially in the last few years, we found about 34 of them. And some of these, are multi-ton stones. So they were separated from the bedrock. They were propped up. It's the rounded type rocks, the glacial boulders that are brought in from a different place by nature, by the glaciers. But the big slabs, and they compose the roof slabs, the wall slabs, the sacrificial table, the astronomical alignments, as I mentioned. And these are all indigenous to the hilltop. But some of these big slabs are, several tons, and they're actually up to 1,000 feet from the main site. And after we got to like number 30 or 31, and we found 34 now, and we keep finding them out there. I think when we cleared the forest and we just finished that project, we're going to find more of them. It dawned on us that these people hadn't completed the site. It looks like it was a work in progress, and these slabs are pretty huge. They're as big as any on the site today, It looks like they had intentions of bringing them up and building a bigger complex. And then the question is, well, why didn't they do that? What happened to them? Why did it stop? And then you can come up with all sorts of speculation and theories, warfare, disease, climate change. I mean, who knows, One of the thoughts was if these people were old world, we know Native Americans were all around the site, and they may have had either 100% involvement or some involvement, but this also seems to be an old world. When you look at the size, shape, and orientation of the structures are so similar to the ones in Western Europe. I mean, there's a couple of them that look like the ones in the Ural Mountains of Russia. It could be just coincidental, of course. But if they were old world people and you had the Bronze Age, you needed tin and copper, and the theory is that they were coming to the New World for both of these resources, the Phoenicians and others. That's one theory, it's not, of course, proven. That when the Iron Age happened, you no longer needed to come over here because iron can be found anywhere and it's cheap. And even poor people can make iron tools, weapons, and utensils and stuff. You didn't need the Bronze Age. Basically, the market fell. And that might have been a reason why they cut off coming over across the ocean. That's just a theory, you know. It's interesting to talk about. It may have not happened, but that's possibly why these people stopped building. I think they're going to have a much bigger construction up there. If you visit, you can see, you know. We always thought it was probably mostly complete, but after finding all these huge roof slabs, they look like roof slabs, just like, you know, what we have in the structures, that I think they were going to continue building the site. And then it came to a stop for some reason.
That's interesting. Patrick Vaughn would like to know, what religion are they tied to, or pagan beliefs?
Well, definitely probably sun. The sun and moon were very important to them. And the question is, who were the people? You know, if we knew the people, yeah, we could probably pin down more of the religion, what type of religion they practice, you know. You know, we have that sacrificial table there. It's just called that. I think Goodwin back in the 1930s, the first researcher, he called it the Great Stone Table, but other people called it the sacrificial table. It's about 4.5 tons, sits up on 4 legs. We have found in the last 4 years not only serpentine walls, 14 of them, and 14 beautiful windows in the walls. These are just beautiful window walls. We found also that in the zigzag walls going from boulder to boulder to boulder, that the floor plan of the chambers, and we used the LiDAR just recently to prove that, they're trapezoid. So if a farmer was building all this, you know, say for the sake of argument, everything was built by a farmer 200 or 300 years ago, I think you'd have 90-degree corners, rectangular, square shape. The floor plans of the courtyard, of the oracle chamber, of the patty chamber, of the chamber in ruins. And it's like next to the sacrificial table, there's kind of a rectangular area that people call the animal pen. It actually looks like it could have been where something was kept for a while before, maybe, you know, if they were in a sacrifice, we just don't know. It has 2 little niches where you could keep food in too. You'd have to see it. It's hard to describe. When you look down at it from above, we've been doing a lot of measuring, but when Tom ran his LiDAR over that too, when you look at the imaging on the screen, and we're doing a PowerPoint together. We're going to have a PowerPoint presentation of the LiDAR. We're working on that. That'll be pretty cool. We're going to go to meetings and conferences with that. You can see the trapezoid shape just with your eye. His equipment can see down to 1 centimeter, so we're looking at a standard unit of measure too. So not only can we get really accurate shapes with his LiDAR because it's so accurate, but when somebody built this site, they probably used a yardstick of some sort. Roscoe Whitney from MIT was an engineer, and he was a foreman back in 1937. And he said, whoever built the site either didn't give a damn or know about linear measurements, because I looked at the width, the height, and the depth of these structures, and they don't conform to imperial measurements of inches, feet, or yards, which you think it would be if it was colonial or post-colonial. But we discovered in the 70s when I was making the diorama, which is the first thing you see when you walk into a visitor center today, it's still there. I built a diorama of the astronomical alignments, so maybe 30 acres out of the 110 acres. And we were doing some careful measuring on the site back in 76, 77, and we were already aware of a measurement called the megalithic yard, which is found in some of the megalithic sites. It's 32 inches, 0.64, or 83 centimeters. And we when we started measuring, we said, I think we might have a megalithic unit here at this site. And that's back, 44 years ago. But we didn't really pursue it. I was still in college. I was building my hours for flying to get an airline job, and we were quite busy, but it was always in the back of our mind. And more recently, we went up there and I had a professional stonemason help me measure. And he goes, wow, well, this measurement, 83 centimeters or 3264, is found in sites in Peru, other places in South America. It's found in Mexico, like at Teotihuacan, and some of the southern mounds. So the LiDAR might help to establish, and it'll be kind of objective, I think, not subjective, like, well, you're measuring it wrong and all of this.
Right.
But I think what we call the sum, standard unit of measure, we might be able to use that as evidence if it is like a megalithic yard. I mean, people will disagree and agree. We're going to have arguments no matter what. But my son's an engineer, and he helped me because, this was not built using inches or feet or yards or old rods, the old English rods.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Weird Realities wanted to know, are there any petroglyphs at your site?
Yeah, they were started finding these back in 1930. It's actually in the oracle chamber. The oracle chamber is shaped like the letter T if you look down at it, like a plan view almost. And it has 5 closets. It has a bed. It has a chimney with 2 stone louvers. That the 2 louvers are stolen the year we opened up. We have photographs of them. It has a big bench seat opposite one of the beautiful closets where they did one of the optically stimulated luminescence testing, actually in the closet wall. But Goodwin actually noticed a carving, and he called it the deer carving. If you look at it, it's not a deer. It doesn't have deer antlers. And over the years in the 60s, we even put down maybe an ibex. An ibex is a Western European animal. And more recently, since I retired, I started looking at that a little bit closer in line, and I found that the Iberian ibex looks like this animal. There's other ibexes too with different antler shapes and stuff. It looks like it. And according to the inscriptions that we have found starting in the 1960s, very controversial, of course, Dr. Barry Fell from Harvard University. He was an epigrapher and an invertebrate marine zoologist. He came from New Zealand, went to school in Scotland, and then he came and worked at Harvard University. His passion was ancient languages and ancient script. And he could speak, I think, 7 modern languages, and he could read about 15 ancient scripts, Minoan linear A and B, Egyptian hieroglyphics, Celtic Ogham or Ogham, Libyan, Phoenician, and some other scripts too. But what he identified that were found before he ever arrived at our site that were in our museum on display were Phoenician, Libyan, and Celtic, according to him. And these type of script have been found from Maine, Manana Island, up near Monhegan Island in Maine, which we vacationed last year, all the way down to Brazil and all the way out to the West Coast. So our site is, again, not unique in that way, but these scripts should not be here, these old world script. And inside the chamber in ruins, we found 3 different inscriptions. And this structure has about a 4-ton roof slab that collapsed in on the structure. We got 3 radiocarbon datings from that structure, and we got 3 inscriptions from that structure. It has 2 windows, and it has a doorway that you walked in, and the 1,000-pound lintel stone too, and that came crashing down at some time in the past, and the roof fell on top of it. And that structure, again, has a trapezoid shape. But they found the inscriptions back in the 60s and 70s, and when Barry Fell came in 1975, he spent time, he took some of them back to Arlington, Massachusetts at his home, and he actually identified them as those 3 types, Libyan, Celtic, and Phoenician. And so we have those type of petroglyphs. But again, Vermont has the highest number up in Vermont. It has chambers, astronomically alignments up there, but it has the most inscriptions up there, up in Woodstock, Royalton, Putney, Pulteney, Vermont. Last summer we went up to Woodstock and looked at one of the chambers. I hadn't been there in like 30 years to see, over 35 years to see that particular structure. So, but they're in Canada too, these inscriptions. So either there's a lot of people out there playing hoaxes across the Americas, from North, Central, and South America. And some of these stones were found, back in the 1800s. Some were found as early as back into the 1600s, before some of these, like Phoenician or Libyan or whatever, were translated. So how would somebody before translation know how to write something in those ancient scripts going back hundreds of years ago, except the original, people that wrote it,
Absolutely.
So that's what we have at our site, Libyan Phoenician recording. He said they came out of the Iberian Peninsula. So the Phoenicians were from the Phoenician coast. They were in Syria, Jordan, Israel, the Golan Heights. And they set up 50 trading cities across the Mediterranean, including Carthage. And then Hanno took 30,000 pilgrims, and they moved around outside the gates of Hercules, Rock of Gibraltar. I've been by there. We went there one time. And they went around in Africa and set up 7 more colonies. And the thought is they came across the Atlantic Ocean. So the Phoenicians, although they came out of the Middle East, they were also in places like Carthago Nova, was a Spanish Phoenician city. And Gades was another one on the southwest coast. I was right in that area too when I took a field trip there. But the Celts came into Spain, and the Libyans did too. So he said it was a melting pot in Spain, and they launched from there like Columbus did to the New World, going back well before Columbus, 1,500 years before Columbus. And that, of course, we have that Iberian ibex in our cave. It looks like that. It kind of fits. Again, it's not conclusive evidence. And again, there'll be a lot of debate about that. But the ibex seems to fit the area where these people supposedly came from, Spain and Portugal, that area there.
Right.
And Spain has some of the most beautiful megalithic sites. If you ever Google them, they're incredible. And Portugal too. And that's one of my destinations, possibly this year. I've been invited to go to the Canary Islands and hop up this. I've been to Spain before, but go up there and I've never been to Portugal and see some of the megalithic sites there. And it's supposed to resemble some of ours. Some of our researchers from the 1960s and 70s, they were open and they said, this looks like America Stonehenge. So I haven't seen it in person. So that's one of my destinations.
We actually had someone in the chat mention the Canary Islands.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's where we were. There's a gentleman from Malibu, California. He's an author, writer, traveler, and he invited me to go with him over there. And
Awesome.
so I may take him up on that offer. It depends on COVID-19, and all of that. But
Right.
he wants me to go with him, and he does some beautiful filming too. He makes videos. He did like 7 videos. The last 2 were about our site and some of the mounds out west using, and he also did a couple sites over in Portugal as a comparison. So
that's awesome. I hope you get to go. I hope you get
that'd
to
be
go.
cool. Yeah, that's one of my best. Yeah, definitely. They in America, most people don't know, we had possibly 1 million mounds, ancient mounds. So when you go listen to the schools, from elementary school through high school, maybe even to college, you may never hear about the mounds out west unless you live there. You heard of the spiral mounds in your state, but if you don't live there, you probably never heard of them. I didn't know there was a mound out west when I was a kid. There may have been 1 million of them from Ohio, which had over 10,000. Indiana had maybe 5,000. They go right out to the Rio Grande. And then because you go on the other side of the Rio Grande, Mexico has over 100,000 temple sites, which are amazing. But these go right into Canada too. There are pyramids and different types of pyramids. There are even ones that are kind of conical shaped, which were usually the burial mounds, and ridge top, flat top. And then, of course, there's the effigy mounds too, serpent shape, and there's one shaped like alligators, and there's others shaped like bears. And the right in Iowa has quite a few of them too. And I used to overnight in Iowa. And up in Wisconsin too. It's just a shame at school they don't teach that we had these ancient. We have pyramids made out of earth in the United States, and like the Cahokia Mountain Complex west of St. Louis, and it covered 4,300 acres, 120 pyramids. In Mont's Mound, back on the Harmonic Convergence in 1987, we had 1,000 people show up suddenly at our site for that big event, and we didn't expect them. But out Shasta, thousands of people went there for meditation and everything. And we even had T-shirts made up for that, actually. Somebody made them up. They had heard people were coming to our place. CNN showed up, and all the Boston stations like, what the heck is this? What are these people coming to our site? But if you go to Cahokia in 1987 on top of Mont's Mound, and I've been there, the top is so huge on that pyramid that 4,000 people easily were accommodated up there for that event. It's gigantic. It's amazing. And if you're familiar with the NASCAR lines down in Peru, the desert drawings, those beautiful artwork, if you go to Blythe, California, there are over 300. Some of these things are bigger than football fields in their artwork. But in schools, they're not talking about our sites in the Northeast. Some teachers may, but they're not in the textbooks. And then 1 million mounds, how do you ignore that? And you can go see them. Some are gone today. Or, even the geoglyphs, like the ones I mentioned out in Blythe, California. Fantastic ancient things you can see in this country that people don't know exist.
That
They're still kind of a mystery. Yeah, a lot there. Really.
I discussed that a little bit with Mary Joyce as well. She talks a lot about ancient civilizations, ruins in our country that none of us even know about because history doesn't cover that. Our history classes don't cover that. It seems like our history classes are geared more towards politics. Is what it seems like to me. It leaves out a lot of ancient civilization history that we really I feel like we should know. We learn from all history, not just what humans, in the past 300 years have done prior to that,
Yeah, you're right. If you put the political filter on with history, you probably end up with nothing coming out the other side, We're talking about that today too, it's really sad. Everything's political today, on one side or the other. Well, we love the astronomy, the archaeology, the history, the prehistory, talking about Native Americans, possible old world visitors coming over before Columbus and before the Vikings, that's our interest. We don't want to make it political. We're just basically looking at the evidence and see where it takes us, and some of the evidence suggests old world visitation to the New World. And one woman said I was being disrespectful to Native Americans. And I'm like, well, for one thing, I have Native American on my mom's side, number one. My son was born with a blue dot, the Mongolian spot. But number two, no. The Native Americans could have been involved with these sites. But we did have a Native American on the latest. It was on a Travel Channel show that was just on 2 days ago. And the Native American from Massachusetts. And he's been to our place a couple times. He became a friend of mine. And but his response, he has Orkney Island blood in him too. And he did a DNA thing, but he has Native American. And when he went up on our site, he said he almost felt like he was going to have a heart attack. He said, and he said, it was on the TV show, basically, this wasn't our people that built this. Because this is not us. He goes, this is not in our tradition. We did other things, but this is not our kind of place. He goes, the place is incredible, but he goes, it's not us. And it gave me the worst. He says, I had to sit down. I thought I was going to die up there. And that's on the show,
Yeah. So, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. Yeah, that is interesting. So I did want to get back to the mounds real quick. We had discussed mounds before we started the show. And Jamie King actually has a great question. Um, do the mound builders and the stone builders have a relation? Because he's from Ohio
Wow.
and Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
They have a lot of mounds there, you know.
Wow, that's a great question. I know even Dr. David Stewart Smith mentioned the Hopewell Adena, and the Mississippian cultures, and some of that coming into the Northeast, not only into New York, but maybe into. There are a few sites in Maine, and it's not on the top of my. I can't think of it. There's a site up in Maine, and they believe there is possibly, I think, Adena influence up there, and that's usually the Ohio Valley, area, the greater Ohio Valley with the Adena because of Hopewell. One of my friends, he lives down in New Jersey, and he's flying corporate. He had to retire. He had to retire at the airlines at 65, but he flew with me in American. He remembers back in the early 90s seeing a earthen serpent just north of Philadelphia, and I've never heard of that. And he said he saw his co-pilot saw it, and everybody looked down at it. He's trying to relocate. He's trying to locate it again. He gave me a GPS because that might show a little bit more of that eastern movement of the mound builders. And they did come into New York. There are a few simple mounds in New Hampshire, and up in Maine, there is a site that they believe might be influenced by the Adena. So that's a great question because it's a serpent walls. Basically, you build out of the material at hand. If you have earth, you build earth. If you have stone, you build stone. I think the Great Serpent Mound actually has a stone foundation under it too. And it was partly a natural shape, something to do with the crater and everything, and it was pointing towards the summer solstice sunset, which could be kind of coincidental, the general direction, but they modified the whole thing into a serpent with a coiled tail and an egg in the mouth of the serpent, which is so cool. But it is aligned with the equinoxes and solstices, as many of these are. And I used to fly into Columbus, Ohio all the time, right by Newark. And some of the greatest earthworks are right there just east of Columbus, Ohio. And one of my co-pilots, she was from France originally, and she lived in that town, and she commuted to, I guess at that time, Boston was our base. And I said, do you know what's in your town? She goes, well, it's a town. I said, well, there's a golf course. She goes, oh, yeah, the golf course. I said, in that golf course, there's some of the best and amazing mounds anywhere in the world, right? And they built a golf course over it. I guess it was better than a shopping plaza, which would have destroyed it. So in that way, it was good, But Ohio's so big, it's too bad they didn't put the golf course just a little further down the road. That is connected by, I think it's a 65-mile ancient road, and you can see it with satellite, I guess, and it's wide enough for 18-wheelers to pass by. And it was curved, 65 miles, this flat road made out of earth. It goes to Chillicothe, and the same kind of earthworks are down there too, 65 miles away. So Ohio has some really cool. And our first researcher, actually, William Goodwin of Harvard, actually lived there for 15 years. He had been in Seattle, Washington. He'd been in San Francisco, and then he moved to Ohio and lived in Columbus. And he was a special insurance. His family were part of the J.P. Morgan family. His first cousin was J.P. Morgan, but he was kind of the guy that was interested in ancient stuff. Now, he was, in business too, but his passion was ancient sites, Vikings, Native Americans. He was involved with looking at the mounds in Ohio, some of the 10,000. Over 120 years ago, he lived there about 15 years. He would go out and map them for the State Highway Department back in the early part of the last century. And then he moved back to Hartford, and that's when he bought our site. He got involved with the rocks, all these stones up there. But Goodwin, he has his critics, but he did save the site. Other people might have put homes on top of the site and just totally destroyed it. He thought Irish Colby monks built the site 1,000 years ago. I mean, if you go back 80 years ago, carbon dating wasn't around, and a lot of the new techniques we use. And so I guess there was more room for speculation, with the evidence that they had. Initially, he thought it was a Viking site when he first saw our site. So he bought 20 acres. Today we have 110, and he put a chain link fence up that's still there 83 years later to protect the site. That chain link fence was put up before World War II. He died in 1950. He willed it to Malcolm Pearson, and Malcolm Pearson died about 10 years ago at 99 years old. And he's the guy that my dad bought the property from. And but the mounds are something we're fascinated about, and did that influence come into this area? You don't have as much earth, you have a lot of rock. And David Stewart Smith was one back, I think he was talking about this back in either the 80s or 90s. He was talking about the Adena influence coming into the Northeast. So I don't know if I answered the question, but we are looking at that too,
Yeah, no, I think you did. And I think it's fascinating how you answer that question. They kind of melded, really. So
Seems like it did. Yeah, it
seems
seems
like
like
they
it.
do have a relation. They
Yeah,
melded the two together using what they had.
yeah.
Um, all right, last question, and this is a good one also. Weird
Uh-oh.
Realities would like to know, what is the most intriguing find that you have personally made at your site?
Um, yeah, not to beat this too much, but I think when I retired in 2016, a lot of my friends said, "What are you going to do?" Well, they knew I had the museum, and they said, "Well, that might keep you busy." But I didn't know we'd be finding so many things, and I think the serpent walls are the thing. I think there is a gentleman that just retired from Department of, I believe it's Historic Places, and a lot of sites have designated that, and he was out of Washington across the country. And the other one is a UNESCO World Heritage Sites too, the United Nations. So he retired from that, and I understand he's working with that group, New England Antiquities Research Association, and his interest is the serpent walls. And I brought this up a couple of years ago. I said, you can't really mistake a serpent wall for a farmer's wall. Farmer's wall have a whole different flavor.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, we started finding these serpent walls are right across the nation, into Canada too. So he wants to, I guess, kind of record all these serpent walls. He wants photographs, maybe survey them, maybe LiDAR them. And he wants to possibly get some sort of recognition for them. And it may be a back way or a back door to get these stone structures recognized too, because they've been called root cellars and all sorts of farmers kind of structures. But when you look at the walls and they undulate, they have a head, and they don't function as a wall at all.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can mistake a serpent wall for any farmer's wall whatsoever. So I think they're going to be working on that project from here to California, from Canada down to the Rio Grande, perhaps, because Ontario, Canada has them. And if you watched Oak Island, which I really haven't watched too much lately, because if you miss a few episodes, but around Christmas time, a friend from high school sent me a note saying, "Hey, they found a stone serpent wall." I'm like, "What?" Because I hadn't watched the show, for a while. And then I was on a radio show about a month and a half ago, and the host brought it up, and I said, "Well, now I got to look at that episode." And sure enough, I checked the episode out. It came around Christmas, and looks like a serpent wall up in Oak Island in Nova Scotia. I used to do a lot of overnights in Halifax, but I never, unfortunately, never went down there to even look at that place. But yeah, they might have one right up there too, a serpent wall up there.
I really thought you were going to say the speaking tube, because the speaking tube to me was like an intriguing find. Well,
that's cool. Yeah, that was found by Goodwin, and actually it had two stone blocking the both sides of that. And one of his work team, when they cleared a couple feet of dirt underneath the table, because very slowly Earth covers these structures up. Mm-hmm. It's like pediogenesis, it's depletion of soil. It comes from windblown particles and vegetation decay. And in New England, it's about 100 to 125 years for an inch. But on a hill, we have the erosion, washing effect. So we do have, in some areas, a couple feet of dirt. In other areas, the bedrock is still exposed. It depends where you are on the hilltop. But the table is almost completely buried because stuff just settles in there, Right. And when they dug down, they were surprised to see the table sitting on four legs. And then somebody moved the rock underneath the table with the wall of the oracle chambers, and it was loose. And they pulled it out, and it's like, oh my God, there's a hole back there, a horizontal hole. And they could see it went in there a ways. And they decided to go into the oracle chamber later, and they pulled the other rock out. It's like somebody concealed this tube that you can actually talk through. And inside the oracle chamber, there's actually a bedrock step. So they quarried some of the stone, but left this raised part of the bedrock. Somebody about 5.5 feet tall standing there can speak right into the tube. And the end of the tube under the table is flared, like maybe like a trumpet or a musical instrument. Right. It makes it like a megaphone. And it was designed acoustically, we think. But they wanted to conceal it. I'm wondering if they did that, like they closed it up in case somebody who wasn't supposed to know about the oracle chamber or the oracle tube came by, right. They wouldn't see it, like the Wizard of Oz kind of thing, That's one of our thoughts. Unfortunately, Mr. Goodwin, 80-something years ago, when they pulled the stones out, they probably just set them aside. They didn't save them and say, this is exhibit A and B. This was, what I mean? They should have, but maybe they attempted to, but they're gone today. We don't know where those two blocks of stone are. Fortunately, Mr. Malcolm Pearson was a professional photographer, so he photographed the site before they did anything. Mm-hmm. And we have hundreds of his pictures, and we have photographs back to 1920. I heard one of the magazines did a story on us recently, said we have no idea what Mr. Goodwin did there. Well, we do. We have 4 pictures from 1920 of different parts of the site. We also have 1935 pictures of a Reverend Ward, and it was a Havel Gazette, which is a town in Massachusetts about 10 miles away from us. And they did a couple of different stories with pictures of our site. And then when Malcolm came in 36, the year before Goodwin touched it or bought it, he was photographing the site. And so, yeah, we kind of know what Goodwin did up there,
Yeah.
Well, those people, they just run with something that they hear from somebody else and say, well, yeah, we don't know what good. He could have built the whole thing. Well, no, Roscoe Whitney set up a plane table and did profile, plan view, and cross sections of the site, mapping everything. And then he meant those comments about the standard unit of measure, But so we know what it looked like before Goodwin, and we know
That's
what it
amazing. I mean, you
That was
lost
good.
the actual stones, but I think it's amazing that you at least had, photographs of it to see how it
Yeah,
was placed before it was removed. That's
we
I
recorded.
think
Yeah,
that the speaking tube to me is the most
you like that?
fascinating find. That
Well,
just I mean, that just, because you think of people building this and, you've made a few Fred Flintstone references. And so
yeah,
this just speaks to a higher intelligence, besides the trapezoid rooms that are not quite, up
yeah,
to today's specs for building, but that just
yeah.
speaks to a higher intelligence to me.
Yeah, and I've been to Delphi in Greece. That was different. The Oracle Delphi. That was a little different, and that gases coming out of the rock and everything, influencing their behavior and what they. But I've been to Malta, below Sicily, and we spent quite a bit of time there. And there were holes in some of the big vertical stones or orthostats. And I asked one of the guides, I said, "What are those? What was the purpose of that?" And I had an idea what it was, but let him explain it. He goes, "That's where somebody would actually talk to that hole, and it was like an oracle giving." People either commands or inspiration or maybe some future, like
Right.
learning about the future. But I said, gosh, that reminds me so much of our oracle tube. I don't know how the thing would function for a farm, but the table is not a limestone for making soap. That's another comment. Limestones are about 36 to 40 inches in diameter. Have a very shallow round hole for collecting you put a barrel on top of rock, ashes, pour water in there. And you collect the fluid, mix it with animal fat, and make soap. So it's a soap-making stone, and you can pick one up. Maybe one or two people. Our stone is 9,000 pounds. It's shaped like a bell, kind of a bell shape, a big trapezoid shaped groove, which is very deep and very wide. And where the runnel is, where it runs off the front in the bedrock, somebody actually, and you don't see any tool marks. They actually notched out the bedrock so that it would either drip into the notch, or you could put some sort of a gourd or maybe ceramic vase in there to collect it. And it's not a cider press either. You can't get a horse and a wagon down there to bring the apples. When I take the leaves out of there every fall, I have 3 different ATVs, including a very small one, and I have to park it about 20 feet away and carry all the leaves out. There's no way you get a horse in there with a wagon to bring in the apples, squish everything, take out the pulp and the product, because some people claim, oh, that's like just a cider mill. It's like, it wouldn't work for that. And there's no archaeological record of that and no archaeological evidence of that either, or a limestone either, So that's what some people call the sacrificial table. And then what are you going to do with the oracle tube? How does that function with the limestone or the cider mill? I have no idea. So I think it's
probably a city manager down there giving instructions from his office.
Yeah, he could have been, yelling and shouting out, what they needed and how much, bring in some more apples, and we're running short, and, But the oracle chamber is really cool. You'll like that too. And it is attached to that's where the oracle tube is. But it has so many features, including underground drains, 2 underground drains there, the 2 carvings, and it has 5 closets. And then the chimney flue had the 2 stone louvers and a stone that would actually slide in a groove over the top to block it. And we don't know what the chimney flue is because it doesn't seem like the rocks are really heated, because when you really fire rocks, they get thermal stresses and cracks. They also, sometimes you'll see the iron gets drawn out of the rocks. They turn reddish. But there's definitely a way you can tell that it's been heated. And even, because soot might not last thousands of years, charcoal, but it doesn't look like maybe they just sent smoke signals too, like, in the Vatican when they bring in the new Pope and they raise smoke, maybe something like that was happening during a ceremony, or maybe a little puff of smoke with it. I don't know, but it's there. We thought often that might be astronomically aligned with the heavens, because a lot of the ones down in Mexico are aligned with the zenith. You look at the stars as they passed overhead, or a certain object, maybe a planet. And I had a gentleman from Harvard University over 20 years ago, really great guy, and he just passed away recently. But he was a professor at Harvard, and we would go there around 1999, 1998, and he worked with my dad quite a bit because I was on the road flying a lot. But we were looking at some of the stars, and then he would go back and look how the heavens look, because the Earth's tilt. There's a 41,000 year obligity cycle, and the precession of the equinox, it does change the heavens a little bit. So he kind of went back in time to see, and that's how we dated the astronomical alignments, because the Earth's tilt. But what did it look like 4,000 years ago? It might have there would be different alignments up there, a little bit
true.
different.
That is a good point. That's
All
a
these
great
things you have
point.
to consider. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. You have to consider all that stuff,
You
in the
do. I
design.
mean, yeah,
Yeah,
you can't just look at it from today's point of view.
exactly.
Literally from
Literally.
today's, lookup, you can't do that.
Because
That's
if you watch the astronomical, like the solstices, they'll actually miss their mark by about your thumb and your little finger. It's about 40 minutes due to the Earth's tilt. Guy named what was his name? He's from England. Forget the guy's name. He's very famous over there. But he said over about 100 years ago, these alignments over here for the solstice, the equinox is still on, but the solstices and anything close to the cross quarter days and lunar will be off a little bit. And he goes, there's something going on here. If we could figure out back in time when they aligned, we could actually date the site. And that was pretty cool. That guy was already onto that. Sir Norman Lockyer was his name. And some people consider him like the grandfather of archaeoastronomy, and Dr. Alexander Thom from Scotland was the father. We met him. He died in 85, but we met Dr. Alexander Thom in Scotland. We had supper with him. It was Thanksgiving over here, and they gave us turkey. They didn't even know that. It was like really cool. But he was he was a professor out of Glasgow, and he had a seat at Oxford University. He was an engineer, just like my dad. He was an engineer. And he found the megalithic yard, the megalithic rod. He was looking at the way these circles, particularly in Scotland, were set up, and using Pythagorean, isosceles, and equilateral triangles. So geometry to build some of these 800 stone circles. So some are perfectly circular. Some are kind of elliptical shapes. So you might have like one foci for a circle, two foci for an ellipse. You would attach ropes to these poles you stuck in the ground. But for the egg-shaped and pear-shaped ones, and these things repeat themselves across the landscape, people are going, look at those old people. They couldn't build a perfect circle for the life of them, except maybe a couple, and there's a couple of ellipses too. But what he found is they were intentional, and they were actually using the 3, 4, 5 and the equilateral isosceles triangles to build these pear-shaped and egg-shaped, and he labels them and classifies them all. And these are big, big stone circles, and they're actually aligned with the moon too. So he was into the astronomy, he was into the mathematics of it, and he was an incredible surveyor. And his son, Dr. Archibald Thom, too, he died in 1995, 10 years after his dad. We met both of them. And they were very interested in what we were doing over here, because some of the mounds out west are astronomically aligned. They were into that, too. The grandson, I understand, is over in Scotland, is carrying out the work. But really, really cool people we get to meet over the years, like that.
No, and all the places that you've been, all the research you've done, you've really contributed a lot just through your own site, but then,
Yeah.
just everything else. So, I mean, I think that's amazing. And this has been a very enlightening interview.
Well, thanks so much. Yeah.
I learned so much from my guests. Every guest I've ever had on, I've learned something from them. But this was a little bit outside my wheelhouse. But I mean, it's just been a fascinating interview. I don't even have any words. Like, it's just, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for explaining everything and answering my questions from my chat. I can't wait to have you back on with those results, hopefully, and anything else that you have going on. I feel like we could definitely do a 2-part show here.
Yeah, we might hear something this week, and I'll go back to the great questions from your listeners. I really appreciate the questions. They're really good, and it helped us learn too. Think outside the box. Things we may have not ever thought about before. So yeah, really great questions, and great questions from you too, and really, really enjoyed that. But this week you might hear back from me. I'll send you a message if we hear anything. It could get messed up, maybe it'll be 2 weeks, but they say this week we might hear. So
that's amazing. Well, I sure hope you get your results, and I hope you get to go overseas. I hope you get to go take a trip.
Yeah, I get the American Airline flight benefit retirement. So, and I've only used it 4 times in 4 years. Isn't that awful? It's a lifetime thing for being there for 27 years, and it's like you didn't get. I've never been to South America, and they're big down there. So a little plug for my airline, but I love my airline. But now I got to get back on the road like everybody. I have so many friends that have just not taken trips in the last year. Maria was supposed to be over here about 4 times. I had another friend that was supposed to go to Scotland, and she had to cancel that reason. It's just everybody. It's like, it's not, it's everybody like that.
Yeah, it's COVID. I was going to say you have no excuse, but it's COVID.
We'll wait a little bit longer until it's safer, and then I told my wife we're going to go. I want to do a trip from Edward, Georgia, where the mountains are, right down to Poverty Point, and do like across the southern. And there's so much down there to see, and that's been canceled twice last year on us too. So that's one of my to do.
Oh, I hear you. I have a bucket list a mile long, and it wasn't that long until COVID hit. And now it's just like,
It's getting longer and longer.
it is all the things that I want to do. So thank you again for coming on tonight.
Thank you so much.
I mean, you have been a fantastic guest, and
Thank you.
you guys go check out his website. Like he said, he has Facebook and Instagram. You guys can keep up with everything he's doing there. Again, we're going to have him back on to talk later on. And if y'all have any questions, y'all can reach out in the ways that he said. So thank you again for coming on tonight, Dennis. And,
thank you very much.
All right. And I will holler at you later. Okay.
Bye now. Thank you.
Okay. I just wanted to touch on some stuff real quick, everybody. Thank you for tuning into the show, and I hope you enjoyed it. It was a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, but I learned a lot. I really enjoyed everything that Dennis had to talk about. He even brought in some Bigfoot related content just for you guys. And you guys don't forget to drop a comment down below with what you thought, like and subscribe, of course. And I wanted to give a special shout out to the affiliates of Nightcallers Bigfoot Radio. Go check out their websites and give them a listen and a like. Don't forget to subscribe. These are great shows that have become part of my affiliate program. So they're supporting me, supporting them, supporting me, supporting them. So we have Bigfoot Society Podcast, Bipolar Teddy Bear Network, Bigfoot Crossroads, Weird Realities, Beaver Hook Productions, and Bigfoot Club. So if you are interested in becoming an NCBR affiliate, check out my website, nightcallersproductions.com, and see what it's all about. And I am going to play a slide if it'll play. I'm having problems with it here lately, but tonight my stream has not wanted to work for me. But we'll see if it'll play. Again, you guys go check out my affiliate webs or shows. You know, they all have great content. They all have varied content, and it's definitely worth checking out. I appreciate you guys again for coming tonight. You know, every time you guys come and you join in the chat and you offer up your questions and you're here to just chat and learn, that means the world to me, and how respectful you are of my guest. I can't thank you guys enough. So thank you again for coming. And I have a members only interview with William J. Sheehan this next week. So if you're a member through Buy Me a Coffee, you can have access to that interview. And also I have my extra night terrors coming out this week as well. So I encourage you to go check out my website, check out my affiliate program, and my Buy Me a Coffee thing as well. My membership, I'm sorry. And the Falk outing is this week. So if you can make it, we sure hope to see you. You guys have a great night, and I'll see you.